hell is this on my head? Thank you. Well, from how my hair looks, I might as well put that on my head, huh? Whew. Man, my work headset does wonders with my hair. Hold on. Never fear, I is here. Okay. Having a wild hair day, y'all. If anybody lives near Nina, will you please, like, go spank her ass? Hello, Miss Reese. Long time no see, sister. How's everybody else a-doing? Are we ready to get this party started? Yes. Everybody getting ready for Christmas? Getting your presents wrapped? As you probably saw, we have like our own little wrapping station back here with the wrapping over there. Yeah. And I ain't wrapped the first thing yet. Damn, this is getting on my nerves. Reckon it worked? Probably not. I swear, y'all, this whole mess has a direction it's going in, okay? I promise. I'm not just torturing you guys with this for the heck of it. I have nothing to drink. Oh well. I was in there watching, I don't even know what station it's on, ER. You guys remember the ER from back in the 90s? I was in there watching that. How crazy is that? I was like, oh my goodness. Well, hello, Miss Lynn. Long time no see with you too. Bitsy. Why am I yawning so bad? Now, last night, it was like close to midnight before I went to sleep. We had a cookie exchange at work yesterday in the office. And I ate cookies all day. Like, all day. Like, that was my lunch. That was... No, I had oatmeal for breakfast. But yeah, I had cookies all day. Yeah. And then I had cookies some more today because we still have cookies left. So, yeah, it was kind of crazy. Hey, Vincy Lou Who. Hello, Miss Wendy. Are you sticking around tonight? All right, remember, anybody that lives near Nina, go spank her ass for me, please. She's in dire need of it. Well, darling, a leave of absence is not good. Hello, Miss Shirley. Thank you, Nina, for taking care of my messes for me. I know sometimes people wonder why a blogger like me has a PA. Well, I have learned that I'm not really sure why, how. I think that's the term I want to use. I'm not sure how I made it to 47 years of life. Well, the first 18 I had my mommy. Then the next 10 I had my hubby. Since then, I'm not really sure. Nina and I were talking about that on the way home tonight. I'm not sure how I made it this far in life without Nina. Because would forget my head if it wasn't connected. And Miss Cate is in the house. Cate McKoy is our author tonight. Whoop, whoop. Y'all, this book is good. It is good. It's cold in here again tonight, y'all. Ugh. It's 36, I think is what 37 is what my app said when I came in here. Hello, my lovely Jamie. How are you, my darling? Okay, that looks fat. I look like what was that one? Jabba. Yeah, Jabba the Hutt. Yeah, I don't need to do that no more. Can y'all see my little peppermints? And they got bells on them too. Hey, little peppermints. You can't hear them, but they jingle. Okay, yeah, I'm really losing my mind here. I don't know. I'm just... Nina, by the way, I had a bagel, a blueberry bagel for supper, so I meant to fix me some hot chocolate before I came back here, and I forgot because I was watching ER. God, my brain is all over the place tonight. All over the place. So, the reading tonight's going to be a little long. Got to do it to get up to that point. That cutoff point. The point where you guys are going to go, no! But it's good. It's real good. Cate McKoy can write, y'all. If you didn't know that, she can write. Which reminds me, I need to put the title up here. I took video. So somebody say something. Come on. I'm doing all the talking here. I got plenty of talking to do later. You'll wear my voice out before I even get up there. I thought I was going to have a special guest tonight because Mr. Mike was back behind me rapping, and he says, what are you getting ready to do? And I said, read. And he was like, okay. I said, we're welcome to stay if you want to. You just gotta be quiet. He left, like, really quick. So, no, that don't go there. Guarding Lights by Cate McKoy. Book 1 of the Dark. Ooh, I just caught on to that. Let me catch on to that dark to just now. Does that have to do with, what's his name? Because unless he changes, he's an ass. Just saying. But I know I'm supposed to say that, right? Oh, Trilology. That was Trilogy. Trilogy. Oh, there. See? Sometimes you just have to talk things out because, you know, I'm kind of goofy like that sometimes. Alright, so we want to save. Oh, right on time. Right on time. And then I'm going to refresh. Bada boom, bada bang. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Okay. Why? Nina bought me. Okay, so let's get started. And Tonight's book is called Guarding Light by Cate McKoy, book 1 of the Dark Series trilogy. And there's the sexy book cover. And if you guys don't know much about Cate, she writes interracial. So for that record, again, and I hate to do this, but you know how this goes. And I always have to say this with certain books. There is language in here that is by the author. The author is writing a lifelike book, so you will hear terminology used. I don't want no ugly comments later, ugly emails, ugly messages, anything else. But there will be words that are used that are not nice. They're degrading, okay? Let's just put it the way it is. It's degrading, especially in the way it's said. So, but it is a lifelike. Unfortunately, in this world we live in, it's ugly. So, but it is what it is. I just want to let you know, I'm reading the book as the author wrote it. So, but she's writing it lifelike. So, enough said. Be done with it. Okay. Boy, I thought that went back that far. I missed the date when I was first reading this. And I was like, dang, this is like me back in high school. Okay. Because I graduated in 90, so. Alright, the beginning. Prologue. Fall of 1988. How many 80s children we got in here? I graduated in 99, so let me hear it. What is that doing? Okay. Woohoo! The cheerful shouts echoed off the walls of the boys' locker room. The members of the NFC football team, the Goldbacks, were in various states of undress, changing back into street clothes after winning their first home game. Jack Guard, quarterback, closed the locker room he stood in front of as he buttoned his shirt. He watched his best friend, John Taylor Dark, known as JT, walk out of the shower area, vigorously rubbing a towel across his blonde head, which was darkened by the water. JT opened the locker next to Jack's, tossing his towels across the bench. "Hey, nice pass, Jack." JT quickly donned his clothes as Jack combed his dark hair into its normal neat style. "Thanks, right back at you." Jack complimented as he put away his comb and packed up his sports gear in his duffel. JT was just finishing up tying his sneakers when he asked, "What you got planned for tonight?" Jack gave his friend a confused look and then took in the pandemonium surrounding them. The wild hollering, happy screams, and all-around party mood of the locker room. You're kidding, right?" JT stood and began packing his own duffel, shaking his head. "No, not kidding. What are you doing tonight?" Jack sighed in frustration. He was having trouble understanding his best friend these last few weeks. He always seemed distracted and worried. Whenever Jack asked if everything was all right, he received the same answer of, "Everything's fine." Ever since his return from visiting relatives in London, England the year before, he had been acting stranger and stranger. Usually, the Dark family visited their overseas relatives every other summer and stayed the entire summer. Normally, JT seemed to find those trips enjoyable and refreshing. But something had been wrong for the past 2 summers. JT's dark moods seemed to come more frequently. So many considered JT an asshole and didn't understand his and Jack's friendship, but JT often showed Jack a side others never got to see. It had started when they were 9 years old. They'd been visiting a mutual friend's house that sat on Winona Lake. Jack had dived into water he he had assumed was deep enough, but turned out to be very shallow, and had struck his head and was rendered unconscious. JT had been the only one of the many kids there that day who'd had the foresight to go into the water after Jack failed to surface. JT saved him that day. It started a deeper friendship that had only until that point been a surface friendship because they shared the same school, friends, and went to the same places in town. Jack was 11 years old when he noticed that JT was sort of a dick to others. But he was a harmless dick as far as Jack was concerned, plus the asshole side of his personality only appeared ever so often. It wasn't a constant thing. JT's actions had been out of character all summer, his less likable traits showing more and more. He had thought his friend would return to normal once school started, but his strange behavior had continued. JT, I was hoping we'd be having a blow-your-mind party at your place. At his friend's frown and slight shake of his head, Jack added, or at least a 10 Hamilton Styles bash. JT slammed his locker, grabbed his duffel, and headed out of the locker room. Jack followed. Sorry, man. I have my own plans to celebrate tonight. JT had an almost secretive smile on his face, a leering type of smile. Jack gave a shout of laughter. Dude, you should have said, what's this one's name? Jack gave JT a knowing smile and a very masculine slap on the back. Oh, man, you can bring her to Ham's party. They waved to several classmates who called out as they crossed the field towards the back parking lot where JT's BMW and Jack's Ford were parked. You know her name, JT said. Jack's steps slowed as he started to get a very bad feeling about to which girl he was referring to. JT, please tell me you're not talking about Caitlin Light. JT angrily swung around to face Jack, leaving the driver's door open as he spoke through clenched teeth. Yes, it's Caitlin Light. Jack was startled for a few seconds at the extreme anger in his friend's crystal blue eyes. He put his palms up in a placating motion. Hey man, I'm just saying. What are you saying, Jack? JT's anger seemed disproportionate to the question he had asked, so much so that Jack just stared at his friend in deeper confusion. Jack decided to go another route in his reasoning. Caitlin Light agreed to go out with you tonight? Right. Jack knew that was impossible and wanted to see if JT would lie. JT lowered his eyes for a few seconds before answering. Not exactly. He rushed on, interrupting Jack's deep felt sigh. But after our stellar performance tonight, she has to say yes. Jack studied his friend's hopeful expression in growing wonder. What was it about Caitlin Light that drove his friend nearly off the deep end? Jack was the first to admit when a girl was pretty, and Caitlin Light was definitely in the top 10 category. However, Jack didn't think she could be worth all the time and trouble JT had already put in on his pursuit of her, an extremely unsuccessful pursuit, not to mention the humiliation of rejection. At the tender age of 12, Caitlin Light had come to be in their class when Jack and JT and all their friends were 15. Her IQ was one of those scary ones in the stratosphere. Her mother and the school district had placed her several grades above her peers. David Guard, Jack's father, had said it was some sort of political thing. His dad was always looking for a conspiracy in everything. Jack didn't think it was that complicated. Caitlin was just a smart little girl whose mother had taken advantage of the accelerated program offered in their district for gifted kids. At first, everyone had just steered clear of Caitlin, being the oddity that she was. Not only was the 12-year-old among 15 and 16-year-olds, she was also the only black student in the advanced honors where she had been placed. But one girl, Sarah Dolson, had taken one look at Caitlin, introduced herself, and then proceeded to take the preteen under her protective wing. Since the long-ago day in 9th grade, the two girls had been inseparable, the best of friends. And as the years went on, the 3 years separating Caitlin and most of her classmates seemed to just disappear. Now they were all seniors, most 18 and Caitlin 15. The girls were very active in the school. Both were cheerleaders. Sarah was captain. They both were in the school's budding computer club. Sarah was the class president and Caitlin was on the school paper. Both girls were very popular, not only because they were beautiful girls, Sarah being the traditional blonde bombshell and Caitlin being an exotic and striking beauty, but their strong friendship made them popular as well. They were constantly at each other's side, doing almost everything together. Their classmates had come up with names for them: the Ebony and Ivory Princesses and the Salt and Pepper Babes. Caitlin was a very likable girl. Jack liked her very much. She was quiet, mostly to counter Sarah's bubbly vivaciousness. Her calm mannerism was pleasant to be around, and she often showed a deep compassion and empathy for fellow students. She didn't like discord in any way. Caitlin treated everyone the same, whether they were black, white, male, or female. She seemed to like everyone except JT. Jack didn't know what JT had done to offend Caitlin, but it must have been something big, and it must have been very shortly after she arrived in their group, because it had been from day one that Caitlin showed her aversion to JT, and it was hard to believe someone as sweet and fair as Caitlin would judge someone sight unseen. Jack knew one thing: if Caitlin had an issue with JT, it was valid. But hell if he knew what it was that caused her dislike of JT. Trying yet another tactic, Jack offered, "Have you ever stopped to think that the reason Caitlin doesn't want to date you is because of the black-white thing?" JT shook his head. "She's constantly in Sam's company, laughing with him. He walks her around the school with his arm thrown over her shoulders." Making his point, JT said empathetically, "And he's as white as us." "It may be what you think when you take into consideration that Sam is her best friend's brother. It may not be what you think when you take into consideration that Sam is her best friend's brother," Jack countered. Just as JT was about to answer, a lot of cars with cheering, shouting, and laughing students started to pass. Among them was Sarah's twin brother, Mustang convertible. Right there in the front was his crush, Sarah, and her best friend, Caitlin. Caitlin was between Sam and Sarah, and the back was overfilled with cheerleaders. Sarah was driving and came to a slow stop across from where Jack and JT were standing as the queue to leave the parking lot slowed. Sam whispered something in Caitlin's ear, and she laughed, giving Sam one of her amazing but rare smiles. Sam then leaned over and kissed her cheek, and Caitlin returned the kiss to Sam's cheek. Suddenly, the occupants in the car all turned and saw JT and Jack. They waved and shouted hellos. Sam shouted, "Dude, you going to Ham's Bash?" Jack knew the question was... Oh, wait a minute, that's Sam shouted. Sorry, I gotta get my other voice in here. "Dude, you going to Ham's Bash?" I know, that's just bad, isn't it? I'm having trouble with male voices, y'all. "Dude, you going to Ham's Bash?" There we go. Jack knew the question was directed at him rather than JT. The Dawsons were protective of Caitlin and minimized their contact with JT. Jack walked across to the car and did a sideways high five with Sam. "Yeah, man, I'm there." Jack bent over to look across at Sarah. "And would the prettiest girl in school give me her first dance?" Sam rolled his eyes and laughed. Sarah smiled and blushed prettily, nodding her head in affirmation. Jack turned his attention to Caitlin. "And the second prettiest girl in school, is she going?" Caitlin was just as beautiful as Sarah. She too smiled at Jack, and he couldn't tell if she was blushing, but she seemed to be. Her shy smile bloomed as she looked down, and her ridiculously long eyelashes hid the deep brown depths of her chocolate eyes. She looked up quickly and then back down she explained, Mom won't let me go to the adult party like that. Thinks I'm too young." "Well, we'll see you in school on Monday and tell you all about it." Jack winked at her. She smiled fully at him, and his heart stopped for a second, or stuttered for a second. I'll get this right in a minute, y'all. I'm sorry. Stuttered for a second before thumping faster. She really is stunning, Jack thought as he continued to hold her gaze with his. She continued to hold his gaze until Jack felt as though the ground was tilting. Suddenly, Caitlin tensed, and her beautiful smile disappeared as her focus became centered over his right shoulder. Without looking, Jack knew JT had moved to stand right behind him. He spoke over Jack's shoulder. "Hi, Caitlin." She didn't speak, turning her head to stare out the windshield. Normally, Jack would have stepped aside to let JT take his turn to speak. But for some reason, his protectiveness kicked into overdrive, and he was reluctant to allow JT even a centimeter closer to Caitlin. "Dude, why do you continue to try?" Sam put in before JT could say anything else. "Leave the girl alone. She obviously doesn't want to talk to you." Dawson, mind your business." JT's pleasant stance changed to combative. "I was talking to Caitlin." Sam got out of the car. Jack stood and stepped back, which forced JT to step back. Sam faced JT and warned, "Man, I'm done with being polite with you." Sam advanced on JT. Jack kept a restraining hand between the two, keeping pace as Sam backed them to JT's car and continued in a stern voice. "I'm telling you, don't talk to her." Sam's talking. "I'm telling you, don't talk to her, touch her, or look at her." JT spine straightened to his full height of 6 feet, chest jutting out. "Or what, Dawson?" Sam crowded JT's personal space. Jack put a restraining hand on both their chests, forcing a bigger gap between them. "Come on, guys, we're all teammates," Jack reasoned. Sam kept his eyes on JT. "We may be teammates, but we're not friends, Dark. And I'm telling you for the last time, stay away from Cate." "Cate, is it?" JT smirked. "Is that what you call her now that you're getting her pussy? You are getting Cate snatch? So how is Dark Meat, Dawson?" Sam gave an angry cry before going at JT like they were in football practice. Jack knew as soon as JT uttered those fighting words, there would be no reasoning with either of his friends. So he braced himself, strengthening his arms against each man's chest. Still, they were slammed against the BMW by the force of Sam's shove. Jack put more of his substantial body between the two, catching a punch meant for Sam on the shoulder. "Come on, guys, stop this." Jack pushed hard against JT, forcing him back up the few inches he gained as he tried to rush Sam. Sarah and Caitlin got out of the car. Sarah screamed when she saw the punches her brother and JT were exchanging. Several hit Jack as he continued to try to separate his two best friends. Caitlin rushed to the trio and grabbed Sam's arm, pulling him towards her. Not really seeing, JT swung hard, missing Sam, his fist connecting with Caitlin's jaw. The sickening smack, Sarah's scream, and Caitlin's gasp of pain as the force of JT's punch flung her to the ground seemed to paralyze everyone. JT, Sam, and Jack all froze, looked on in horrified surprise as Caitlin shakily sat up, cupping her jaw as blood trickled from her bottom lip. Jack swore and gave his friends one last push in the opposite directions before going to Caitlin still on the ground. "Oh, baby." Without thinking, Jack kneeled, picked Caitlin up, and cradled her against his chest. She put her arms around his neck and laid her head against his chest as she started to cry. Jack started to walk down the row of cars toward his own Ford sedan. When he heard someone start to follow them, he shouted over his shoulder, not caring which one it was, "Don't stay back." When he reached his car, Jack opened the passenger side and gently placed Caitlin sideways in the seat. She was crying, nursing her jaw with her right hand and wiping blood off her lips and chin with her left. Jack opened his glove compartment and took out his mini first aid kit his father always insisted he carry in his car. Squatting in the open doorway, he took out several medical wipes and gently took her hand away from her jaw, soothing as she protested. Shh, shh, baby, it's okay. I won't hurt you, but I have to see. His voice turned husky. He wiped the blood from her lip and chin, being very careful not to cause her any more pain. She was docile under his touch, sitting quietly as he finished by cleaning the blood from her hands. Cautiously, he put his fingers on her chin, tilting it tenderly. Sweetie, you're already starting to swell, and I think you're going to turn a bunch of colors. He looked in her tear-drenched, soft brown eyes and felt himself drowning in their depths. How do you feel? In soft tones that sent a shiver down his spine and rushed straight to his dick, she answered, I feel like I've been punched by a 6-foot-tall football player. For half a second, Jack froze until he saw the twinkle of humor in her eyes. My God, she was lovely. Beautiful. Wait, Jack shook his head. What was he thinking? Sarah was his girl, his crush for 2 years now. What was he doing drooling over Sarah's best friend? And a baby at that. At his last thought, he took a quick glance at the breasts that were highlighted sexily in her blue and gold cheerleader outfit. Her breasts were bigger than Sarah's and most of the girls on the squad. Caitlin might have been 3 years younger than her classmates, but her body was just as mature as theirs. And she was built along the lines of a centerfold. Damn! Jack quickly brought his eyes back to hers so she would not catch him staring at her chest. She got enough of that from JT, and he most definitely did not want to be the same category as JT. He laughed at her humor. Next time, stay out of the way, sweetie, Jack cautioned. Let me handle it, okay? She smiled at him and then winced at the split in her lip stretched. He tenderly stroked her chin. I'm so sorry you got hurt. That's okay. She touched the hand that was caressing her chin. It was not your fault. Will your mom freak? Jack was concerned. Caitlin shook her head. No, she'll listen to what happened, decide it was an accident, and tell me to stay out of it. And she might throw in a kiss to make it better. Jack stilled at her comment. At that very moment, he didn't know what guided him to do his next action, only that he wanted very much to do it. His gaze held hers. He slowly began to lean toward her, giving her plenty of time to stop him if he wanted. I don't want to leave out the kiss in my first aid, he whispered. Other than her deep brown eyes going wide, Caitlin didn't move. He held her gaze until hers fluttered close as his lips made contact with her jaw. Gently, he feathered kisses along her jaw, cheeks, and closed eyes. Her smell drove him nuts. She smelled like sweet peaches warmed by the sun. Softly, he put his lips against hers, being careful not to use too much pressure. Caitlin gasped against his lips. Instinctively, he knew it wasn't from pain. Her sweet sigh lengthening his cock, pushing it against his jeans. Tempering his desire to crush her to him, Jack put the tip of his tongue to her uninjured top lip, gliding it slowly back and forth. She moaned, Jack. Suddenly, Jack pulled back. Just that quick taste of Caitlin had him wanting to bury his cock so deep in her that he didn't care they were in the middle of the school's parking lot. I'm sorry, Caitlin. The last thing you need after being hit by a 6-foot-tall football player is being fondled by a 6'2" football player. You didn't fondle me. Caitlin's voice was lower too, and her sweet smile did things to his insides. If she was older, he would have said something other than legs in as he stood and waited until she was settled before closing the door. He quickly ran back to where Sam, Sarah, JT were waiting and picked up his duffel that he dropped. Is she okay? JT asked. Jack was pissed at him. What was his deal with Caitlin? He didn't know, and at this point, he didn't care. It was time to nip this in the bud. Do you really care if she is okay? JT frowned. What kind of question is that? You know how I feel about her. Shouldering his bag, Jack nodded. Yes, I know how you feel about her. He glared at his closest friend. And I know how she feels about you. Jack put up a hand, stalling anything JT was about to say. Caitlin has told you, Sarah and Sam. Caitlin has told you, Sarah and Sam have told you, he crowded into JT's face. Now I'm telling you, stay the hell away from her. JT sneered at his friend. What? Now you want to get a hit of that dark meat too, Jack? Jack had started back towards his car, but at JT's words, he didn't hesitate. He spun quickly, dropped his bag, and stepped into a roundhouse punch directly to JT's jaw. JT went down just as violently as Caitlin had. Jack didn't like violence, but he wasn't going to let his friend harass a girl. He wasn't brought up that way. Women were to be protected. He stood over JT and warned, I knew you were a pig sometimes when it came to girls, but those girls you did and dumped were willing. Your little groupies. Caitlin has told you 1,000,000 times in 1,000,000 ways to leave her alone. I've stayed out of it because you were my friend, and you were being harmless even though you were also clueless. Jack unclenched his fist as he continued. JT, you are wrong. The girl wants nothing to do with you. Be the man I think you are and leave her alone. Jack turned and grabbed his duffel, then turned back to JT still on the ground. Now you've been warned by me. He looked at Sam and Sarah. I'm giving Caitlin a ride home. I will see you guys at the party. Caitlin was silent on the short ride to her house. She didn't live in one of the best neighborhoods. Jack rarely had a reason to venture into the ghetto part of his town. He spent most of his time in his own upper-middle-class suburb or the more opulent splendor of JT's neighborhood. He really didn't have a reason to be in this part of town. He took in the rows of 3 or 4-story brick buildings and storefronts. Some of the areas looked very clean and neat, but then just a few blocks over they were unkempt, dirty, and graffiti-ridden, and with large groups of kids of all ages walking or just hanging around on the porches and steps of the buildings. And on the corners were even bigger groups of mostly teens, mostly males, and all black. Just make it this left and it's the third building on the right. Caitlin's soft-spoken words took Jack away from his study of her neighborhood. Following directions, he pulled in front of the building she indicated and parked. Is your mom home? She shook her head and opened the door. Thanks, Jack. Not wanting to leave her alone just yet, he got out of the car and walked with her up the external flight of steps to white double doors. Caitlin's building was one of the nicer ones. She rang a doorbell for the second floor. You live on the second floor? Jack didn't know why he was lingering, but he didn't want to leave. No, my neighbor Latasha does. I live on the first floor. She gave him a look from under those gorgeous eyelashes. My book bag with my keys is in Sam's car. Do you want me to run and get them, or you can ride with me since you can't get in your place? Jack liked that idea a lot. That's okay. Latasha can let me in. I'll hang at her place until Mom comes home. Just as Jack was about to tell her he didn't mind going, the front doors opened. An older teenage black girl with a high afro and a huge smile looked at Caitlin. Hey girl, you locked out again? Caitlin smiled at the girl, nodding. Yeah, can I hang till Mom gets back? Girl, you know you don't have to ask. Latasha looked from Caitlin and Jack and then back again. So, who is this fine white boy? Caitlin bowed her head and admonished in a stage whisper, Tasha! Oh, girl, please. You know he's fine. Tasha rolled her eyes and looked Jack up and down and made an appreciative sound in the back of her throat. Jack found himself blushing. He had never encountered such an openly sexual look before. He also found himself liking Caitlin's friend. He stuck out his hand. Well, white boy's name is Jack Guard. Nice to meet you, Tasha. Tasha's eyebrows climbed. Ooh, okay. She took his hand and shook it. I see you got one of those really white boys. Tasha cocked her hip, putting a hand on each. He ain't one of those wiggers. Why is it white wiggers? Wiggers is what I'm going with. I'd never heard of that term before. Oh my God! Caitlin covered her face with both hands. Jack looked at Caitlin, and this time he knew she was blushing. He laughed and looked back at Tasha. Cocking an eyebrow at her, he questioned, Wigger? You know, a white boy trying to be black. Not a nigger, but a wigger. Jack studied Tasha to see if she was kidding, but he could see she was in earnest. Oh, well, I'm just me. Tasha threw her head back and laughed, giving Jack a slap on the back. I like you, white boy. I like you too, Tasha. Jack found himself meaning it. He wasn't familiar with any blacks other than Caitlin, and Caitlin seemed exactly like all the girls in his circle, except for the color of her skin. Tasha and Caitlin even spoke differently. Now I can see by the look on your face that you was expecting me to be like kitty cat hair. Tasha teasingly reached over and pulled Caitlin's high ponytail. Jack narrowed his eyes at Tasha. That's good. How did you know what I was thinking? Caitlin gave him a quick look. He couldn't tell what made her give him such a speculative look. He returned it, quirking an eyebrow at Caitlin. What? Caitlin just shook her head. She surprised you, honest. Tasha told him with a smile. I think Kitty Cat wants her some white boy. Oh, Tasha, do shut up, Caitlin said. Uh-oh, she got her prissy white girl tone going. Tasha smiled and winked at Jack. That means she mad at me. Jack looked at Tasha. Why is she surprised? If you answer him, Latasha Key Williams, I will never speak to you again. Caitlin put her hand over Tasha's mouth as she started to speak, totally ignoring Caitlin's threat. Jack laughed. Oh, okay, I'll leave it for now. Tasha pushed Caitlin's hand off her mouth and smiled at Jack. She will tell you herself if you ask right. Tasha laughed and kissed Caitlin. Caitlin winced, bringing a hand to cup her jaw and lips. Tasha reached behind her and turned up the light in the hall. It was then that Jack realized it was a dimmer and it had been on the lowest setting. Light shone brightly now. Tasha gasped as she pulled Caitlin's hand away and saw her face. What happened? Caitlin pulled away, shaking her head. It's nothing. Tasha put her hands on her hips and narrowed her eyes at Caitlin. It was that JT asshole, what, right? Jack was shocked. How did Tasha know JT? What makes you say that? Tasha looked at Jack, but this time her look was hostile. Like you don't know, bastard. Jack had never felt so insulted. Look, Tasha, I don't know you, but I can tell you love your friend. He looked at Caitlin. I happen to like her too. Jack, it's nothing, Caitlin said as she started up the steps. Tasha pulled her back down the 2 steps she had walked. Hell no. Hell no. You gonna tell him what that white boy was doing to you right now, or I am. Caitlin wrapped her arms around herself and the tears began to fall. What the hell was going on? Jack was confused. But he responded to the feelings going through him. Putting his arms around Caitlin's shoulders, he kissed the sides of her temple and whispered, "Tell me." Jack forgot that Tasha stood there as his hands began to soothingly caress Caitlin's arms. "Please, sweetheart." Caitlin shuddered and cried harder. Now I'm changing names. Jack took her more fully in his arms. She laid her head against his chest, her hands gripping his shirt. He rocked her, rubbing her back. Caitlin, what is it?" Tasha looked at Jack over Caitlin's head. "I'll tell you. He's been messing with her." Jack looked at Tasha. Her look was direct, clear, and determined. "Go on, Tasha." Caitlin shook her head against his chest. They both ignored her. "Well, when she was 12, he pulled her in a boy's bathroom and told her to get gone, that they didn't want any little niggers dirtying up their honors class." Tasha stared at Jack as she continued. "When she ignored him a few weeks after that, he pulled her into another boy's bathroom. This time, a bunch of his friends were there." Tasha's tone was hostile stare drilled him as she asked with her eyes. Jack pulled Caitlin closer to him as he felt her tremble. "I wasn't one of them. I had no idea." Tasha stared him down until she seemed satisfied by what she saw and continued. "He pulled her panties down and told his friends to get a good look at a nigger girl." Tasha's voice grew quiet. "I think some of them touched her." Caitlin cried out as she pulled out of Jack's arms and ran up the stairs. Tasha tried to follow, but Jack put his arm out to block her. "Let her have some time alone. I want to hear the rest." Tasha stepped back. "Are you for real?" She looked up at him with something close to disbelief, but not quite. Jack felt his jaw clench tight. "I've never been more real." Tasha nodded as though she'd come to a decision. "Okay, Jack, I'll trust a white boy for the first time in my life." She sat on one of the steps and waved him to another. Jack sat and looked at her. "Well, he's been doing it for years, ever since she'd been at that school." Tasha leaned her elbows on the step behind her. "He's been getting her alone, filling her up when he can." She sighed sadly. "Some real sad, sick shit, too. He has even showed her his dick. Told her to get ready to be sucking it like the nigger whore she is." Jack sat stupefied and then felt his bile rise in his throat. "Do you know if he has..." He couldn't say the words. "Has that pig raped her?" Tasha bluntly asked. Jack nodded. "Nah, not yet, because he says it's all leading up to their graduation party where he'll take what is his, sick bastard." He quickly looked at her. Her words put a fear deep in his gut for Caitlin. Why wouldn't she have told someone, at the very least Sam and Sarah? Kitty Cat's still a virgin. Tasha sat forward and shook her head. Probably going to stay one too after everything that bastard's done. Jack voiced the question most on his mind. "Why didn't you tell anyone? If what you say is true, they are crimes. He could be charged." Tasha moved so fast, Jack barely had a second to put a hand up to block the hit coming toward his face. His arm blocked her hand from connecting with his cheek. Their arms remained crossed as they stared angrily at each other. "What the hell?" If it's true that bastard has terrorized her since she has entered that school, scaring her, leaving sick pictures in her locker with notes saying that what is he going to do to her? She doesn't want to be kicked out of the accelerated program. She is shooting for a full academic scholarship. All she talks about is leaving Newburgh and becoming a reporter. And she did tell someone, me. Jack let his arm fall and asked, "Pictures? What kind of pictures?" "Porn, mostly." Tasha was direct in her answer. "White guys doing some master-slave type of crap to black girls." "Jesus!" Jack ran a hand through his hair. Jesus ain't got nothing to do with the pictures she showed me, Tasha smirked. Jack ran a hand through his hair, agitated. He could not believe one of his closest friends since first grade was a sick deviant, and he had been terrorizing a girl right under his nose. Do you still have some of the stuff he gave her? Jack wanted to know. Nah, they made Cate so sick I threw them away. She's only happy when she's at home reading one of her books or hanging with Sarah and Sam and me. Man, this explains so much about her behavior. Jack sighed as he continued sadly, and unfortunately it explains so much of JT's behavior too. So, are you going to be white as always right and stick with your boy, or are you going to do what is really right? Jack was so surprised at the question, he just stared at Tasha in disbelief. You can't think I would allow this to continue now that I know about it? Tasha just quirked an eyebrow at him and patted her afro. Yes, I do. Jack's jaw clenched. Well, think again. I am not into harassing little girls or threatening them with rape. Jack got up and started for the door. Tell Caitlin she has nothing to worry about anymore. Jack slammed out of the building so angrily he didn't take notice of the satisfied gleam in Tasha's eyes. Jack was true to his word. At the party, he single-handedly hunted down JT. He found him in a back bedroom of Hamilton's mansion, a half-drunken cheerleader vigorously riding him, one of his little groupies. Jack recalled now how at another party the same co-ed had been ordered by JT to give the entire team head. Jack had bowed out, not really wanting to know if she would do it. Then he had turned his back on his friend's obvious sexual deviant actions. He didn't think it was harmful as long as the girl was willing, but now he wasn't sure if the girl had ever been willing. What if JT had threatened her too without his knowing? The very idea made Jack physically ill, his stomach queasy. He gently tapped on the co-ed of the shoulder. Excuse us, Tammy. Tammy looked over her shoulder, shrugged, and quietly got off JT. She just as quietly left the room, pulling on her clothes as she did. Hey, man, what gives? Jack slurred his words as he sat up, throwing the sheet over his lap. I would have given you a taste when I was finished. Jack snapped. He lunged at JT, slamming his head against the sturdy wooden headboard, his hand going around his throat. JT's eyes went wide as the pressure on his neck increased. Jack planted his knee in his chest. JT pulled at Jack's hand at his throat to no avail. He began to gasp for air, struggling to breathe. Jack shook him by his neck. Pay attention, JT, because I'm only going to warn you once. Jack did not continue until JT stopped struggling, dropped his hands to the bed, and was looking into Jack's eye. You twisted piece of shit. Stay away from Caitlin in school, out in the streets, everywhere. You see her coming, you go the other way. Jack squeezed harder and raised... Where'd that come from? And raised his knee, then rammed it back down. JT tried to cough, but it came out a weak sputter. Your torture of Caitlin ends today, and so help me God, you are going to live to regret it. Caitlin is now under my protection. Do you hear me, scum? She's mine now, and I protect what's mine. Jack suddenly released JT, who sat up and struggled for breath. He coughed and spit onto the floor. As Jack turned to the door, JT began to weakly laugh. So our virgin nigger has given it up to the superhero quarterback with the 10-inch pole. JT rubbed at his sore throat as he continued to rasp his poison. How was Caitlin's pussy? Tight, hot, wet? Did you make her bleed and come all over your cock? Jack turned back and looked at JT in pity. You are sicker than I thought. Right, like you haven't wanted to see and suck those black tits and fuck that nigger pussy since the day she walked into our honors class. JT spat. Horrified, Jack stepped toward the bed. Do you fucking hear yourself? Caitlin was a little kid when she came to our class. 12 years old, for Christ's sake. If that bitch bleeds, then she can be plucked, sucked, and fucked. JT tossed the sheet aside and began to dress as he continued. You come in here with your hero bullshit, spouting dire warnings, when in reality you just came from doing what I've been trying to do since the bitch got here. JT sat down as he put on his sneakers. Who knew she preferred brown hair to blonde, green eyes to blue, and a 10-inch cock to a 6-inch one? Jack sadly shook his head at JT. I don't know what the hell is wrong with your brain, but I strongly suggest you seek psychiatric help, and fast. Jack went to the door and opened it. Looking over his shoulder, he gave one last warning. This is the last time I'm going to talk to you. Stay away from me and mine, and I'm going to do more than talk. Jack quietly left the bedroom, once again missing a look thrown in his direction. This one was laced with hatred, meanness, and something not quite sane. Chapter 1. Yeah, that was all the prologue, yo. Whew. Chapter 1. The Middle. Caitlin placed the circular track on the school field, waiting and wondering why Sarah had asked her to meet her here so late. Sarah had sounded happy and excited. If she had to guess, Caitlin would say that Sarah and Jack had finally gotten together officially. Caitlin smiled at the thought. Jack was the perfect guy for Sarah. He was smart, even-tempered, and gorgeous. His 6'2", sexily muscled, brown hair, green-eyed frame steered all the girls' hearts, Caitlin's included, and he had a hero complex a mile wide. He was always protecting those weaker and smaller than him. She had never understood the friendship between JT and Jack. They were so vastly different, one kind and one mean, one considerate and one thoughtless. They were polar opposites. Caitlin liked Jack a lot, even had a crush on him, her first crush, but knew that he viewed her as too young for him. Besides, her best friend was crazy over him and had been talking about Jack ever since they had become friends. If she couldn't have Jack for herself, then she was glad someone as wonderful as Sarah was going to be his girl. Jack Guard was one hell of a guy. People often teased that he took his last name too seriously. Either way, Caitlin knew he was her protector, and because he decided to defend her, her senior year had been awesome so far. The Monday after she had been punched by JT, Jack had pulled her aside near the lockers. He had told her that he had taken care of JT, made sure that JT would no longer bother her, and said that if JT did approach her, she was to come get him right away. He had ended that good piece of news with a peck on the cheek. From that day on, JT had kept his distance, never so much as giving her a look. At first, it seemed too good to be true, but as the weeks and months passed, Caitlin became more carefree. She attended more parties, left campus for lunch, and honor for the senior class. She had never exercised until Jack had stepped in to make her life better. She even spent more time with Sarah after school. But the very best plus was that every day she spent more time with Jack. He sat next to her at lunch or took her and Sarah out to lunch at the local deli. He drove her home a lot now and spent time with her waiting until her mom come home. It was during these times that she and Jack really got to know one another. She told him about her dreams to become a journalist, and he told her of his to be in law enforcement. He teased her about her obsession with chocolate, and she teased him about being a jock, a really smart jock. He had started calling her Kitten. When Caitlin had asked why he kept calling her that when everyone called her Caitlin or Cat, he had simply answered, "You're not quite a cat yet. You're a little kitten, a baby." Caitlin didn't mind. It made her feel special. He was the only one who called her Kitten. Sometimes when her mom wouldn't be back until midnight, Jack would come up by for dinner and a rented video to watch when the VCR. The first time he showed at night when her mother wasn't home, it had been to return her keys, which had been left in his car after he had given her a ride home. When he realized she was alone, he had said he'd keep her company. Caitlin had told him it wasn't necessary, that she was alone 3 nights a week. She was used to it, and that if she was really scared or worried, she could go upstairs to hang with Tasha. Jack ignored her and stayed, and then he proceeded to show up on all the nights her mom was out until midnight, bearing dinner and a movie. Jack was a horror movie buff, and Caitlin liked romantic comedies. Jack had sighed a deep put upon sigh as he graciously said, "We'll take turns with my horror and action films and your chick flicks." Caitlin had laughed as she agreed to put up with his yucky movies if he was willing to sit through the tearjerkers and happily ever afters. It was one of their movie nights that had forever changed their dynamics. They'd been watching one of Jack's horror movies, Friday the 13th, and Caitlin couldn't stop jumping. Jack had laughed and put his arms around her as they relaxed back against the sofa. He held her through the remainder of the movie, soothingly caressing her arms as she laid her head against his chest. Caitlin had been so scared by the movie she had grabbed Jack's t-shirt, twisting it and pulling it against her eyes whenever something gruesome came on the screen. Not realizing this put her face in his chest, stomach, and abdominal area each time she closed her eyes. The movie was at an end when she became aware of the bulge in Jack's jeans. At first, she thought it was his normal bulge. After all, his bulge was bigger than most boys on the team. Sarah had laughingly pointed that out to her one day when they were at cheerleading practice and looking at the football team as they worked out in their gym shorts and t-shirts. Sarah had smacked her lips and said, "And he isn't even hard yet." Caitlin had only a vague idea of Sarah's meaning, but it was brought to the forefront of her thoughts as the movie ended and his bulge seemed to have doubled in size. Caitlin gave Jack a quick glance beneath her lashes. He was watching her watch his bulge. Caitlin didn't know what to say or do, so she just sat there. Jack seemed to be waiting for something from her. He let out a relieved breath when she only remained sitting within the loose hold of his arms. "I'm sorry, kitten." "Why?" Caitlin looked into his intense green gaze, which had gone bright green with some unfathomable emotion. "Christ, I am no better than dark." Jack shook his head, gently removed his arms from around her, and stood and adjusted the inseam on his jeans, making room for his considerable growth. He began a frustrated pacing in front of the TV. Caitlin didn't know what had caused him to think such a thing, but she repelled it to the very core. "No, Jack, you can never be like him." Caitlin spat the word as if it were through a four-letter expletive. "Kitten, I shouldn't want you like I do. I shouldn't get hard and sexually excited when I look at you, smell you." His pacing became faster as he ran his fingers through his hair in annoyance. "You are a kid, for crying out loud." Caitlin considered her words. "Is it all right for you to want Sarah?" Jack stopped his pacing and gave her an embarrassed glance. "I can't believe we're having this conversation." "Well, is it okay for you to want Sarah?" Caitlin needed an answer. "Yes, we are peers, equals." Caitlin smiled. "Jack, Sarah is 5'5.5". I am 5'6.5". Sarah weighs 108 pounds. I weigh 112 pounds. Sarah's bra size is 36B, and mine is 36D. We both wear size 3 jeans. Sarah can wear small size tops. I can wear some small tops. But because of the style, sometimes I have to wear a medium. Jack's eyes widened with her list of Sarah's and her attributes. He had known the girls were about the same size and that Caitlin's breasts were bigger, but he never thought of the sizes being equal. Caitlin's curves were a bit more substantial. With heat climbing up his neck into his cheeks, Jack explained further. "Kitten, just because your bodies are close in size doesn't make it right. Sarah's more naturally mature." "I am mature." Caitlin blushed at how immature that sounded. She was hurt and not wholly sure the reason for the tears springing into her eyes. She blinked them back. Oh, kitten, you are misunderstanding me on purpose. He went to her, kneeling in front of her and taking her hand in his. You want Sarah more than me. I understand. His eyes flashed a deep emerald. Now you're trying to make me angry. Caitlin looked deeply into his eyes. I don't want you to be mad at me. He sat back on the sofa and took her in his arms again, putting his chin on top of her head as her arms circled his waist. Kitten, you're too young for me. He kissed her temple. That doesn't mean I don't find you attractive. God, I do, even when I shouldn't. I find you attractive, too, Caitlin shyly admitted. Yeah? Caitlin smiled and nodded. Jack couldn't stop himself. He slowly lowered his mouth to hers and gently brushed his lips with his, a sweet rubbing back and forth until the heat between them ignited. Jack groaned, pulling Caitlin into his lap a second before taking her mouth. With an aroused gasp, Caitlin gave Jack the entrance he sought. His tongue tutored hers in lovemaking with her mouth. He tasted her thoroughly before teasingly inviting her tongue into his mouth. As always, Caitlin was a good student and learned quickly. She tasted his mouth as he had done hers, swiping her tongue along his, across his teeth, roof of his mouth, and sexily swirling hers around his before slowly withdrawing and giving his lips another hot glide. Jack pulled back, breathing heavily. Damn, kitten, you are going to have me exploding in my pants. Caitlin gave a questioning quick quirk of her eyebrows. Jack put hair that had escaped her French braid behind her ear as he explained. See, you are too young and innocent to know what I'm talking about, even after all the crap Dark did to you. Jack shook his head in anger, still pissed he hadn't known anything was going on with his so-called best friend. Caitlin knew Jack partially blamed himself for not intervening sooner. Jack, you couldn't have known. It's not your fault. She caressed his strong chin. He hasn't touched you or bothered you in any way, has he? Caitlin shook her head. No, he has left me alone since you did whatever it is you did. Good. I think I would kill him if he ever came near you again. Wanting to change the subject and relieve some of the tension going through Jack's body, Caitlin demurely revealed, I know what you mean by exploding in your pants. Oh, really? Yes, we girls had the hygiene talk in the 5th grade, and my mom is studying to be a nurse, so she gave me the talk, too. You were talking about coming, or the medical term, ejaculating. Uh-huh. So, you don't know about ejaculating from first-hand knowledge? No. Good. Let's keep it that way. It's not something you need to know about firsthand right now. Caitlin gave him one of her trademark looks from beneath her lashes, asking, What if I want to know about it from you? Please? Kitten, don't even say that. I can't resist you as it is. Caitlin wanted Jack to teach her all he knew. She wanted to erase all the disgusting stuff JT had planted in her mind, giving her nightmares. JT made her body tighten up in anxiety and stress and tremble in fear. Jack made her tremble, but in a good way, and he made her body tighten too, but in specific areas. Jack, I want to make you come, please. She quickly put a finger to Jack's lips as he started to interrupt. JT made me scared and sick about the things that went on between boys and girls. But you make me want to know more. When you kiss me, I feel it here. Caitlin put her hands over her breast and lowered them to her lap. And down here, it feels warm and kind of moist, and I feel achy, but not in a painful way. Jesus, baby, you telling me you are hot and wet for me is driving me nuts, and knowing your nipples are getting hard for my kisses is making my mouth water. So you will let me see you come? Jack pulled back and stared into her eyes. He studied her for several minutes and then nodded to himself as though he reached a decision. Are you sure, kitten? She swallowed nervously and nodded. Okay, so here are the rules. Jack's voice was serious as he lifted his chin in question, lifted his chin in question, and when Caitlin nodded her agreement, he continued, I will not take your virginity. We will make out and do some heavy petting until I say we stop. Agreed? And the number one rule of a guy coming. When he paused, Caitlin frowned in confusion. Which is what? Jack gave her a sexy wink and lowered her gently to the sofa. Ladies first. Alright, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I know that sounds rough, y'all, but I got to get to the rest of it. Okay. 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 Withdrawing, he whispered, Thank you, kitten. He stepped back, sighing and giving her a worried look. Listen, I'm going to be asking Sarah out officially. When she bowed her head, he continued, feeling like an ass. I know it's pretty awful telling you this right after our first... Jack paused, not sure what to call what just happened between them. But I really don't want to just show up in school one day and with Sarah in my arms without you knowing beforehand. She looked up with tears in her eyes, making him swear again. Damn it, Caitlin. I don't want to hurt you, and you and I can't be together. Caitlin nodded and whispered, Are you going to ask her out tonight? Jack's eyes widened. Christ, no. I couldn't so soon after I know what you mean, and thank you. Don't thank me. I feel like such a shit, but I really, really need to get you off my mind and out of my head. And he clarified, besides, I really like Sarah a lot. I've been crushing on her for 2 years. If I can't have you, then I'm glad it's Sarah. She is a great friend. So you okay with me and Sarah getting together? Caitlin frowned, shaking her head. Does it matter whether I'm okay or with it or not? It's not like I could stop, right? Jack gave her a strange look and shook his head. I'm leaving before you realize just how much power you do wield. With those cryptic words and even more puzzling look, he was gone. He was one great guy, and Sarah was a great girl, and they were her friends. And that made Caitlin happy. Now, if Sarah would just get here and tell her how Jack finally made his move, everything would be great. Glancing at her wristwatch under one of the field's lamp posts, Caitlin, remember they're back at the track. Caitlin thought of the fit her mom would throw for being out so late. Caitlin understood her mom's very strict attitude towards her activities. May Light was a single mother working as a CNA at a local nursing home while she took nighttime college credits towards her RN degree and license. May was doing everything alone, and all she had was her exceptionally bright daughter. Long ago, Caitlin had asked about her father. Her mother got a distant look and told her the tragedy of her father's death. He was black and Cherokee Indian mixed. Caitlin's parental grandfather was 100% Cherokee and had lived on a reservation. Caitlin's grandfather had slept with a black woman but had married a native woman who also lived on the reservation. He had also kept a house in town and had kept Caitlin's grandmother, giving her no greater status than a mistress or a whore. Caitlin's father, Lightfeather, name for his agility so light on his feet, had been disillusioned and had been known to quote his father. "I had to keep her heritage alive with a native woman. I could not contaminate the bloodline with half-breeds." Those words were her grandfather's actions toward her father, and her father had bred contempt in her. Those words and her grandfather's actions towards her father had bred contempt in her father for all things native. Her grandfather had forced her father to spend half his year on the reservation and half his year at the house in town with his mother. He had forced him to spend time with his full-blooded Cherokee siblings while her grandfather went into town and spent time with his black mistress, Caitlin's grandmother. By the time her father was 18, he had been so filled with hatred and rage towards his father that he denied all things Cherokee. He changed his name from Lightfeather to Lee Light and never went back to the reservation again. Never visited or spoke to his 13 half-brothers and sisters again. Her father has said, a black woman gave birth to me. A black woman raised me. So I have no desire for any other kind of woman. Ironically, Lee Light had died in a bar fight defending a Cherokee woman who had been harassed by some male patrons. One of the guys had pulled a knife, plunging it deep into Lee Light's chest. He was dead before he hit the ground, leaving a pregnant wife behind, Caitlin's mother. Caitlin was curious about her unknown relatives, but out of respect for both parents, she never mentioned them or tried to seek them out. Because her mother worked so hard to give all she needed and some of what she wanted, Caitlin respected and admired her mother and didn't mind following her very strict and sometimes austere rules. With that in mind, if Sarah didn't show soon, she would have to leave before her mother started to worry. Caitlin heard the gravel shift from behind her and turned. "It's about time." Caitlin's word died in her mouth when she came face to face with J.T. Dark. His smile was pure evil. "Yes, I know. It's way past time." Caitlin trembled and nervously looked left and right, just now realizing how deserted the school's field was. She glanced at the road in the distance behind her and started to slowly back away from J.T. "What are you doing here?" Caitlin sought to distract him as she inched back another step, glancing over her shoulder, looking for anyone. J.T. kept pace with her as he inched forward. "Why, my little cat, I'm here to collect." Caitlin kept a steady retreat towards the road behind her. It was late, but cars still passed intermittently. "Collect?" Caitlin's heart raced in fear, and her stomach turned. "I came to get my taste of your pussy. You were a bad girl giving your cherry to Jack." His smile turned to a grim frown. "I had been priming you since you got here. That cherry was mine, and you went ahead and gave it to the town's golden boy, Jack Anthony Guard." With lightning speed, he reached out and grabbed her wrist. "And what did it get you? Nothing, you stupid bitch." "No, let me go." He pulled her hard, forcing her to stumble. Jack just wanted to taste some dark meat, and he was lucky to get your cherry. But right now, he's balls deep in some juicy Sarah Dawson pussy." Suddenly, Caitlin knew she couldn't fight right now. She needed to get that crazy gleam from his eyes. Trying to force her erratic breathing under control, she stopped struggling against J.T. You're right." I am, huh?" His hold loosened and he reached up to place his hand on hers against his chest. Yes." Caitlin looked at J.T. He still looked crazy, but not as mean. His eyes were too bright and glazed and his breathing too shallow. He almost panted. J.T. stared into her eyes. Then his head began to slowly lower. He was going to kiss her. Disgust flashed across Caitlin. As he closed his eyes, she gave his chest a hard shove, putting all her strength behind it. J.T. was following. Caitlin was turning. She ran full out. She was in great shape and knew she was fast, and she had a few seconds head start. She didn't look back. Caitlin kept her eyes on the street lamp in the distance. Her legs pumped furiously, and her feet pounded the ground. She was almost there. In a few seconds, she would be in the full glow of the street lamp, and cars in any direction would see her. Just a few seconds. 5, 4, 3, slam! Caitlin's face hit the ground. It actually bounced. A metallic taste rushed her mouth as it flooded her blood. In a dazed fog, she realized she had been tackled. Before she could recover her breath, JT was on his feet, grabbing her ankle, delivering a painful kick to her side. Fire seemed to burst from the point of contact to her side. Attempting to scream, Caitlin grasped at the ground as he began to drag her along the field by her foot, twisting it as she resisted. Her scream was a weak whimper. JT paused to give another kick to the same side. Caitlin saw stars behind her closed eyelids. Pain exploded down her entire left side. Caitlin tried to slow her progress by kicking out with her free foot and clawing at her hands along the ground as the terrain changed from grass to dirt to gravel. JT made his way across the large lot. Caitlin found her fingernails break and bend as she pulled up grass and dirt. Tears streaming down her face, she realized JT was making his way towards the large wooded area surrounding the school's back property. The woods were dense and camouflaged all sorts of activities many of the kids participated in while skipping. Caitlin had heard the rumors of it being a great place to make out, smoke pot, or just hang. Realizing no one would hear or see her if JT made it to the thick foliage, Caitlin doubled her efforts. She had gained some of her breath. Opening her mouth, she screamed for all she was worth, kicking at JT's legs with her free appendage. JT countered with a kick to her side again and one to her head. Nausea swamped her stomach and dizziness stole her vision for precious seconds. Caitlin forced herself not to lose consciousness. However, she must have been out of it for a minute or two, because the next thing she realized was that she was already in the deep part of the woods. Darkness had fully fallen. JT was a dark, gloomy, looming figure. He was mumbling under his breath. Caitlin felt cool air on her legs and realized with renewed panic she was naked from the waist down except for her panties. Caitlin tried to sit up, but again pain shot up her side. Slowly she tried clawing along the ground towards the dim light, weakly piercing the thick vernal curtain. Twigs, leaves, rocks, and dirt mixed to hinder her slow progress toward her small beacon in the far-off horizon. Suddenly, JT stopped talking to himself and seized her progress by stepping on her hand. Caitlin screamed in pain. "Where do you think you're going, bitch? The party is just starting. Please don't do this." It was too dark to see his individual moves, but her hair was pulled hard and her head slammed into the ground. Bile poured into her mouth and stomach. "Did you beg Jack?" he growled into her ear as his spittle ran down her face and into her eyes. Caitlin sensed another move from JT and put her hands up to block what might be coming. She screamed as her right hand began to sting hotly and a warm wetness trickled out of her palm down her raised wrist. There was more movement from his hulking dark form, and she felt a slight sting towards her abdomen, her chest, and then a consuming chill. JT was using some sort of knife to remove her clothing, and he had slashed her hand and nicked her stomach and chest. Now naked, Caitlin fought hard. No! She bucked wildly when she felt him straddle her, swinging her fists without aim. She connected with flesh several times, but she wasn't sure what she hit. JT howled when her fists connected. Caitlin had hit his nose. Suddenly, she was relieved of his weight on her lower body. She tried to quickly crawl away, ignoring the pain and keeping an eye on the dim light. In a short amount of time, her foot was grabbed and she was pulled back against the rough terrain. Caitlin felt dirt, leaves, and twigs pushed between her buttocks, rocks, and unseen sharp objects toward the skin of her bottom. "You don't get to leave so soon, kitty cat." JT flipped her onto her stomach, straddling her again from behind. "Jack may have gotten your pussy's cherry, but I'm guessing he is too straight-laced for that ass. I'll get your ass's cherry, then I'm gonna fuck every orifice you have, bitch." Full understanding slammed into Caitlin, and with it, blinding terror. She struggled even harder, ignoring all pangs of pain. JT gave a deranged laugh, grabbed a handful of her hair, and slammed her face into the ground. Now it is time for my cherry busting. Beyond days, she threw up in the dirt. JT positioned them in a sickening, twisted parody of a lover's embrace. Lying fully against Caitlin's back, parting her legs with his knees, he lifted up a little and started spitting. Caitlin threw up again, realizing he was spitting in his hand. Then she felt that violation of his hands parting her buttocks and smearing the spit along her anus. Caitlin tried screaming again. Help! Help me! It had sounded loud to her, but her facilities were very diminished by stark terror and injuries. JT gripped her thighs, spreading them wider, even though Caitlin fought to keep them closed. Caitlin let out another long scream. JT grabbed her hair and slammed her face into ground again, then laid his cheek against Caitlin's bleeding and bruised one. Just remember, bitch, it didn't have to be this way. He lifted away, and several seconds later, Caitlin felt his hands on her buttocks. Then, the most searing, hot, tearing pain in her anal muscles were breached and torn asunder. The blinding white pain took Caitlin's breath and consciousness for several seconds. Caitlin became aware of JT running against her while leaning his weight onto her back. Each of his thrusts caused her body to be scrubbed abrasively against the ground she lay upon. Caitlin's tears never ceased as she went in and out of consciousness. Every time she awoke to her body being defiled in a new way, she spasmed out of oblivion into reality. Her hymen was savagely torn and her virginity forever stolen. Caitlin came aware again with the sense that she was alone. JT's oppressive weight was gone. There was a foul taste in her mouth, blood and vomit mixed with something else. Caitlin struggled to gain her bearings. Agonizingly slow, she started to crawl around the ground toward the still weakly shining light in the distance. Caitlin wasn't sure the source of the light, but she was sure it represented help. Her body screamed its pain. She went sluggishly over a log in her path. Caitlin couldn't name one part of her body that didn't hurt, but she was most afraid of the bleeding she could feel oozing from her vagina and anus. Her mom's medical books were a wealth of information, and Caitlin knew bleeding was not good. Caitlin's tears increased as she thought of how her mom would be left alone if she died. But she refused to die in these woods. She would live for her mom, for herself, for revenge. She was going to make the monster pay. Her vengeful thoughts gave her strength. Not sure how long she inched along the ground, and not sure how many times she had actually stopped because she had passed out. Caitlin thought she was dreaming, or it was just a manufacture of wishful thinking when she heard her name. Pulling in all the strength she had, Cate picked up speed and tried to call out. As the light got brighter, Caitlin knew she was heading towards the bleachers on the roadside of school. And yes, there it was again, her name. Someone was calling her name. No, more than one person. Infused with hope, Caitlin made it to the edge of the back bleachers and called out again. This time raising her hand, and then she heard clearly. "Wait, Sarah, what was that?" It was Jack. "I didn't hear anything," she raised her voice. "Caitlin!" Again, weakly, Caitlin called out. There was a pause, and then she heard pounding footsteps coming toward her. Knowing help now on the way, Caitlin's little strength left her, and she fell fully against the ground, her hand still stretched towards the light and help. And that was how Jack and Sarah found her. An anguished howl rented the calm night air, seconded by a horrified scream. The first one male and the other female. Jack came to a skidding halt as he knelt beside Caitlin. He wanted to grab her up into his arms, but his past 2 summers of ride-alongs with paramedics gave him the knowledge that he could do Caitlin more harm than good. Jack's jaw clenched hard in useless rage. He took in her many visible injuries. She was naked, One side of her face looked like she had had a bout with the current heavyweight champion. Her eye was swollen shut. Her upper chest had a gash that was bleeding, as did her stomach. There was a deeper gash in the open palm that reached towards them. On the other hand, her index finger was bent at an unnatural angle. There was blood between her legs, running down her thighs. At this sign of the ultimate violation, tears came to Jack's eyes. He was swamped with more impotent wrath. There were friction burns all along her back and buttocks. Blinking his tears away, Jack slowly and carefully ran his hands along Caitlin's body to check for obvious breaks. With his limited training, Jack felt the more serious of Caitlin's injuries were internal. Jack took off his jacket and slowly wrapped it around her upper body. He then took off his t-shirt, creating a makeshift pad, and put it gently between her legs, pressing it against her vagina. Caitlin gave a pitiful whimper in protest. Jack soothed. "Shh, it's okay, kitten." She shuddered, and her teeth began to chatter. Jack became aware of Sarah standing beside them crying. Digging in his jeans pocket, he handed her his keys. "Go to the car, get the blanket out of my trunk, and start the car. Turn the heat up full blast. She's going into shock." Sarah took off at a dead run. Jack carefully picked Caitlin up into his lap. Remembering some more of his paramedics training, he tried to orient her. "Caitlin, baby, can you hear me? It's Jack." She stared in his arms, her one eye open slightly. "Jack, please help me." Her whispered plea tore at his heart. "I will, baby." His tears began to fall. That seemed to satisfy her to some extent, for she relaxed, giving him all her weight. "Kitten, baby, do you recognize who did this? Do you know him?" Caitlin seemed to give a slight nod as she whispered, It was JT." Jack frowned, staring at her. She slipped back into unconsciousness. Just then, Sarah came rushing back with the blanket. Jack quickly wrapped it around Caitlin, standing with her. He made his way as quickly as he dared to the car, thanking God that the hospital was only about 3 minutes away by car. Caitlin was obviously in a very bad way. Jack kept Caitlin in his arms in the back seat while Sarah drove the short distance to St. Luke's Hospital. Jack prayed as Sarah sped towards the ER. "Please, God, let Caitlin make it through this. Please let her live." Sarah pulled up in front of the wide double ER sliding doors with screeching tires. She opened the door for him and ran ahead, calling for a doctor. Several staff members came forth with a stretcher. Jack gently placed Caitlin on it. Caitlin was whisked away. Jack kept pace with the stretcher until a nurse blocked him with an outstretched arm and asked, "Are you family?" Not hesitating, Jack answered, "Yes." The nurse paused, looking him up and down, noticing his determination and shirtless, bloody chest. She shrugged and allowed him through an inner double doors to follow Caitlin. Jack stood back as the various medical staff worked on Caitlin, switching her from the stretcher to the bed. A tray full of medical paraphernalia appeared. They called out pertinent information as it was gathered. There was an order for a surgeon and for someone to call the police, and Jack thought he heard the words "rape kit." Rape. The word hit Jack in the chest. Someone had raped Caitlin. Someone had violated his sweet little kitten. Wiping his tears away, his anger returned full force. He was going to make the animal that had done this to Caitlin pay. It was the last thing. All right, I'm going to skip back just a little more. Caitlin sat in her hospital room staring at her lunch tray. It had been 2 days since she woke up. In those 2 days, she had been visited by numerous doctors, a psychiatrist, a rape counselor, policemen assigned to her case, Tasha, and, of course, her mother. She was told that she would be released as soon as she could eat, urinate, and move her bowels. Caitlin had already eaten and peed. Just one more, and she could leave this place. She looked at the flowers, cards, and balloons, which comprised all her get well wishes. There were quite a lot of them. Caitlin didn't feel cheered by the bright, colorful collage. She felt humiliated. They all knew. They all knew what had happened to her, knew the things JT had done to her. Just the thought of so many people knowing made Caitlin physically ill. Tears came to her eyes. Angered by yet another crying jag, Caitlin sent her bandaged hands swiping across the bedside table. A wave of cards, flowers, candy, and her untouched lunch covered the floor. She was sick of crying and feeling as though her life was at an end. The only thing that stopped her crying was her anger, so Caitlin fueled it. Keeping the horrible details of the attack in her mind, she refused to forget a single tidbit. She would forget nothing. The asshole needed to pay. Caitlin couldn't wait to testify so she could watch him put behind bars. The rape counselor had told her some women didn't feel as though they could survive a trial because sometimes it backfired and it seemed as though the victim was put on trial. All her details being highlighted. Caitlin had fiercely told the counselor that she was not one of those women. She didn't care what she would have to tell about herself, just as long as JT got his and she got justice. Oliver Clancy, the detective assigned to her case, had taken her statement the day she woke up. He had told her it would be no problem for him to get a warrant for JT Dark's arrest. He told her he would return when the arrest had been made. Caitlin had felt some satisfaction when Detective Clancy failed to respond to the Dark name. Caitlin knew the Dark family was very prominent in the community and the name carried a lot of power. But Clancy had simply nodded and asked her to sign her statement with her mom looking on. Caitlin pushed the call button. When the nurse responded, Caitlin contritely said, "I'm sorry, but my table tipped over." The nurse gave a pointed look at the still upright table and called housekeeping. Caitlin was just leaving the bathroom in her room when her mother, Clancy, Sarah, and Jack walked into the room. The nurse had remade her bed while she was using the facilities. Now she carefully assisted Caitlin back into her bed, seeing she was comfortable. She left the call button next to her hand on the bed and left Caitlin with her visitors. Caitlin's mother walked up and hugged her. "Oh, good. They removed your IV and catheter." Caitlin blushed at her mother's nonchalance in mentioning something so private in a full room. Caitlin knew it was the pre-nurse in her. Everyone ignored it. Clancy pulled up a chair for her mom and took another for himself. Caitlin gave her friends a quick glance. She saw them unclasp their hands. Jack got the last chair in the room for Sarah and stood behind it with his hands on Sarah's shoulders. For some reason, Caitlin couldn't take her eyes off the gesture. It left her feeling weak and shaky. She looked into Jack's eyes. They were in an intense green, his expression grim. Their gazes remained locked, a silent communication. Caitlin's attention didn't switch until her mother lightly touched her. "Detective Clancy has something to tell you about the case." Caitlin's eyes switched to Clancy's. He was frowning. "Did you arrest him?" "No. It seems JT Dark has an alibi for the time of your attack," Clancy reluctantly imparted. Caitlin shrugged it off. "He's lying." "He had corroborating witnesses." Caitlin, ignoring her mother's staying hand, flung back the sheet and weakly stood, holding the side of the bed. "They're all lying!" At Caitlin's edict, everyone shared uncomfortable looks. "What?" she questioned, not missing the exchange. Clancy cleared his throat. "His witnesses are above reproach." Caitlin shook her head as her tears started again. "So, because he's rich and white, you believe him over some little some little hysterical nigger? That's what he called me while he raped me." "Caitlin!" Maylott exclaimed. "No, Mama, he's lying. They're all lying. JT Dark raped me. He tackled me, kicked me in the stomach, dragged me into the woods, raped me in my privates." Heartbrokenly, she stuttered. Not just my vagina. He raped my behind, Mama. My mouth, too." May's and Sarah's tears streamed down their faces. Clancy bowed his head. Jack's eyes shone brightly with misery, his jaw like iron, and his clenched his teeth. Caitlin started heaving. So he gets away with it because he and his friends are lying? Mom stood and circled the bed, started to take Caitlin into her arms. Don't touch me! Never touch me! Clancy lifted his hand. That's just it, Caitlin. Clancy lifted his head. That's just it, Caitlin. His witnesses are not his friends. Pausing, Clancy pinned her with a look before adding, they're yours. For Caitlin, the room tilted and started to spin. She looked at Sarah, who was slowly nodding her head. In slow motion, her gaze turned to Jack's. Green clashed with brown. Caitlin limped towards Jack, stopping a few inches from him, their chests almost touching. Say it. I dare you to. Say it. She whimpered into his face. Jack looked deeply into her eyes with the tears he had been able to keep at bay, finally falling and whispered back, JT couldn't have been the one to hurt you. He was with me and Sarah. Caitlin screamed, drew her hand back, and delivered a solid smack to Jack's face. Ignoring the pain that coursed through her injured hand, immediately a red mark appeared on Jack's face. She started pounding on his chest, backing him to the wall. Jack did nothing to protect himself, allowing all of her blows to make contact. Liar! Liar! Why? Why are you doing this? Caitlin's next scream hinted of insanity, filling the room and possibly the entire ward. Suddenly, Jack caught her to his chest, quickly lifting her and placing her on the bed. A doctor and a nurse burst into the room. Caitlin continued to scream, Liars! Liars! Why are you lying? The doctor and nurse took over in trying to restrain Caitlin. The nurse had a syringe. Mynae held one of Caitlin's wrists, trying not to hurt her. Caitlin continued to scream, You'll pay! All of you will pay! Liars, you will pay! Her ranting continued until the drug took effect, her pledging ringing with stark sincerity. Okay, so Chapter 3, that's all I'm reading tonight. Chapter 3 starts 25 years later. So everybody's grown up and become big boys and girls. But who raped her? That's interesting, huh? Very interesting. So, that is Miss Cate McKoy's book. It is on... Do I have anybody left? Yay, I do. Miss Cate, are you still with me? It is on KU, so Kindle Unlimited. And Miss Cate, if you're still with me, let me know how much it is to buy. This is a trilogy, so there's 2 more to go with it. And I about read everybody off. Goes to show I can't read more than an hour, huh? All right. Just checking my messages ago. You're welcome, Miss Cate. You're welcome. Whew. I think that one topped J. Morgan Woodall's book. I think I read longer with this one than I did $2.99 regular. Boom. All right, ladies and gents. Nana, are you still with me? It's kind of a toss-up who's going to be tomorrow night. I think we were having some issues with the person that I was supposed to read tomorrow night. So if I don't get what I was looking for there, who am I reading tomorrow night, Miss Nina? It's after 9. Who am I reading tomorrow night? Miss Carly Davis. All right, we're going to read some Rider tomorrow night. So, everybody get ready for tomorrow night. We got some, and go get this book, y'all. It's on Kindle Unlimited. Come on, go get the book and read it. Gotta find out who raped her. Oh my gosh, she's, who did it? Alrighty, you guys have a good evening. Love you. Happy reading.